The woman didn't bump into Adiz by accident. She hit her shoulder like she was testing something and waiting to see what kind of person she'd just found. Adiz Obi had her basket on her left arm and her mind somewhere else entirely, reaching for a can on the middle shelf with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing her own shopping since she was 17 and had never once found it interesting. She felt it in the way you feel something that was meant, the deliberate weight of it, the absence of any attempt to avoid her. She steadied herself, set her feet, looked up. The woman already turning toward her was polished in the particular way of someone who had been groomed for rooms far more important than this one. Her expression carried the full, unbothered certainty of someone who had never had to move for anyone and had no intention of starting today. "Watch where you're going." The voice was precise and unhurried. "Are you blind?" Adiz looked at her. Looked at the space between them, the space that told her clearly who had moved into whose path. Looked back. "I'm sorry." Simple. Already turning to go. The woman stepped in front of her. "I'm not done. I asked you a question. Do you not use your eyes?" Adiz stopped. Set her basket down slowly on the nearest shelf. Then she turned and looked at this woman with the full, unhurried attention of someone who had made a quiet decision about how much of herself she was willing to spend on this moment. "I apologized," she said. "That's all you're getting." The woman's jaw tightened. Something shifted in her eyes, not anger exactly, more like recalibration. She stepped closer. "Do you know who?" "No," Adiz said. "And it wouldn't change anything if I did." She picked up her basket, walked around her, didn't look back. Behind her, Eunice stood in the aisle and watched her go. Something cold and calculating settled behind her eyes, the expression of a woman who had filed something away for later. "If you think that moment was something, stay with me. Because these two women are going to end up in the same room again. And when they do, nothing will be the same after. Like the video, subscribe, and don't move. You don't want to miss what happens next." 2 years before that grocery store aisle, Adiz was moving fast through a hospital corridor on her break, not running, she never ran, but moving with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned to compress rest into whatever shape the shift allowed. She had 11 minutes. She was going to use 10 of them. She almost missed him. He was standing near the information desk with the look of a man who had been redirected twice already and was deciding whether to be angry about it. Tall, broad, civilian clothes that were expensive without announcing it. The staff behind the desk were occupied with 3 things at once and had pointed somewhere general and moved on. She stopped. It was not a complicated decision. It was simply the kind of person she was. She saw something that needed doing and she did it. She crossed to him. Asked which ward. He told her. She took him there herself, walking at a pace that said she had somewhere to be but wasn't going to rush him. Outside the ward, she pointed at the nurse's station and told him who to speak to. Then she turned and went back down the corridor without waiting for a thank you. She had 7 minutes left of her break. Han Jae-won stood outside that ward for a moment after she disappeared around the corner. The associate he had come to see was inside. The building was full of people moving with purpose and noise. And he stood still for just a moment thinking, she didn't ask who I was. She just helped. He didn't get her name. He didn't forget her face. Jae-won had been running the Han group since he was 24, earlier than anyone expected, and without hesitation. The years that followed made him precise, decisive, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be understood. Then the mandatory service notification came. His mother had wanted to find a way around it. There were always ways for families like theirs, deferrals, exemptions, arrangements that could be made quietly and efficiently with the right conversations. Jae-won had listened to her make the case and then told her no. She had asked him why. He had looked around the boardroom they were sitting in, the long table, the city view, the weight of the Han name on every surface, and said, "Because I need to know who I am without all of this. 18 months. I'll be back." He had gone. In the barracks, nobody knew who he was. For the first time in years, that was enough. He had not volunteered his background and nobody had asked the right questions. For the first time in 3 years, he was simply a man doing what was required of him, and the relief of it was something he hadn't expected and couldn't fully explain. 3 weeks into training, During a conditioning run that had already claimed 4 people's dignity and 1 person's breakfast, a soldier beside him went down. Not injured, just empty, the tank completely dry, body refusing the next instruction. J1 stopped, pulled him up without breaking stride, got him to the end. The soldier was Emeka Obi, 24 years old, Nigerian, built for warmth rather than military discipline, but working hard to close the gap. He had looked at J1 afterward with the expression of someone who understood they had just found something worth holding onto. "I owe you," Emeka had said. "You don't," J1 had said. They had been friends since that afternoon. 16 months into service, visiting day arrived. Emeka had been talking about his sister for weeks, not obsessively, just the way people mention the people who anchor them. She was coming. Adiz. A nurse. "She'd like you," he kept saying. "You'd like her." J1 had smiled and said he'd come by to say hello. He rounded the corner of the visiting area with his hands in his jacket pockets and the easy posture of a man with nowhere urgent to be. He stopped. She stopped. The recognition was immediate and mutual, the kind that bypasses the brain entirely and lands somewhere more honest. The hospital corridor. The 11 minutes. The woman who hadn't asked his name. Emeka looked between them with the expression of someone watching a scene he didn't have the script for. "Wait. You two know each other." Neither of them answered immediately. J1 spoke first. "She helped me once. I never got to say thank you." He looked at her steadily. "Thank you." Adiz almost smiled. "You're welcome." Emeka opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "When? How? What?" "Not now, Emeka," Adiz said. They exchanged numbers that afternoon. Emeka watched the whole thing with the particular expression of a younger sibling who has just realized the world has been doing things without consulting him. What followed was built slowly and across distance. Texts that started as practical, "How's the training? How's the ward?" and became something neither of them had planned. Late night calls in the evenings he was off duty. Her telling him about a patient she had sat with past the end of her shift. Him telling her about something a fellow soldier had said that had stayed with him. The conversations never performed anything. They were simply 2 people finding out who the other was without the pressure of proximity. One night, 2 months before his discharge date, he called later than usual. She picked up on the second ring. 2 months left, he said. "I know," she said. "I want to take you somewhere proper. When I'm back." She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is thinking rather than hesitating. Then okay. Neither of them said more than that. But something had been named, finally, even if only in the space between words. Her brother had noticed. He said nothing. Filed it away. The discharge date arrived on a clear morning. Adiz took the day off work and drove to the base. Simple outfit. No performance. She stood with the other waiting families in the open air and felt the particular mix of nerves and calm that came from being about to see someone she had spoken to every week for months and had not physically stood in front of since a visiting day corridor. Then the convoy arrived on the other side of the entrance. 3 black vehicles. Moving with the deliberate coordination of a security arrangement, not a family pickup. The doors opened and the men who stepped out first moved to positions with practiced efficiency. Then a woman in her late 50s emerged, silver-haired, sharp, formal, the kind of woman whose posture alone communicated that she was accustomed to being the most important person in whatever room she entered. Beside her a younger woman, mid-20s, equally put together, looking around the entrance with eyes that were quietly cataloging everything. The families nearby reacted, straightened backs, lowered voices, the kind of deference that happens automatically around certain kinds of power. Adiz watched with the idle curiosity of someone who had noticed something interesting and had not yet connected it to anything personal. Then Emeka came through the gates. She crossed to him, and they held each other the way siblings hold each other after long separations, for slightly longer than strictly necessary, neither one willing to be the first to let go. When they finally separated, he was grinning, and she was blinking more than usual, and neither of them mentioned it. Then she looked up. J1 came through the gates. His mother and Jaiwoo moved toward him, and he went to them first, embracing Jaiwoo warmly, then his mother, holding her for a moment longer than expected, the weight of 18 months in it. Mrs. Han held her composure, but her hands gripped his jacket briefly before releasing. Jaiwo was already talking. Then he stepped back, looked across the entrance area, found Adiz where she stood with Emeka. He crossed to her, and he hugged her. Not a greeting. A real one. Unhurried. The kind that told every watching eye something without saying a word. Mrs. Han, who had just released her son, watched him cross to this woman. Her expression didn't move, but her eyes were working, moving from her son to this woman and back again, cataloging everything. Emeka stood 2 steps away from his sister and his barracks friend and looked between them with his arms slightly out from his sides, a man who had just realized he had been missing significant chapters. Adiz, he said. Not now, Emeka, she said, without turning around. Jaewon stepped back eventually, looked at her, said nothing, but she understood all of it. That evening, after Emeka had eaten everything in Adiz's refrigerator and claimed the sofa with the authority of someone who intended to debrief extensively, their parents called from Lagos. The screen lit up with both of them at once, their mother in her good sitting room chair, their father standing slightly behind her the way he always did on video calls, as if he hadn't quite accepted that the camera could see him too. Their mother was already talking before the call had fully connected. Emeka, my son. Let me see you. You look thin. Are they not feeding you people? Adiz, is he eating? He looks thin. Mama, he looks exactly the same, Adiz said. I gained 4 kilograms, Emeka said. Where? Where did you put it? Their mother demanded. Their father leaned slightly toward the camera. Well done, my son. We are proud of you. Simple. Genuine. The way their father always said the things that mattered without decoration. Their mother had questions for another 20 minutes. About the food. About the sleeping arrangements. About whether the other soldiers had been respectful. About whether Emeka had been going to church on Sundays, a question Emeka answered with the practiced confidence of a man who had decided optimism was a form of honesty. She asked about Adiz too. Was she eating? Was she sleeping? Was she working too many shifts? Had she met anyone? Mama, Adiz said. I'm asking a question, her mother said. After the call ended, they sat in the quiet of the apartment for a moment, the particular silence that follows family contact, warm and slightly exhausting. Then Emeka pulled up something on his phone. Someone from the base had sent him a link, one of those society publications their mother used to keep in the sitting room in Lagos, the kind that tracked old money and older names. He read the headline. Read it again. Turned the phone toward Adiz. Han Jae-won, son of the late chairman Han Byung-soo, heir to Han Group, one of Korea's most established conglomerates spanning finance, development, and private equity. Just discharged from mandatory military service. Expected to resume full executive leadership immediately upon return. There was a photograph. Younger. A formal event. But unmistakably, completely, the man who had hugged her at the base gates that morning like he had been waiting the whole 18 months to do it. Adiz and Emeka looked at each other across the coffee table. Emeka. I know. That is. I know. The convoy. The security. The way the families around them had straightened when his mother stepped out of the car. The Han name, a name they had both grown up hearing in the background of news and business conversations without ever attaching it to a face. That face was now in Adiz's recent calls. She picked up her phone and called him. He picked up on the second ring. You didn't tell me who you are, she said. A pause. Not a long one. Does it change anything? She thought about it. Not the polite version, the real one. I don't know yet, she said. You should have told me yourself. I know, he said. I should have. In the barracks, I was just J1. Nobody moved differently around me. Nobody needed anything from me or feared me or wanted something because of my name. A beat. You already didn't need anything from me before you knew any of this. That's why I didn't tell you. But I should have. You're right. She sat with that. Let it settle honestly. Does it change anything? He asked quietly. No, she said. But don't do that again. I won't, he said. They stayed on the phone a little longer. Neither in a hurry to hang up. Emeka, from the sofa, pretended to be very interested in the ceiling. The date he took her on was a rooftop restaurant, city spread below them, the kind of quiet that money buys not with noise but with space. No visible security, though she understood now that they were somewhere nearby. She thought about what this view had cost him, not in money, but in the 18 months, he had walked away from all of it deliberately. She told him that. He was quiet for a moment. I needed to know I was more than the name, he said. The barracks gave me that. He looked at her across the table. You gave me something else. She asked what? Someone who saw me before they saw any of this. She held his gaze. Something settled between them that neither of them needed to name out loud. 3 weeks later, his mother organized a homecoming gathering. Small, Jae-won had said. Close family and associates only, no crowd. Mrs. Han had agreed. She had also, quietly and without informing her son, extended an invitation to the Seo family. Yoona would be there. It was time, Mrs. Han had decided. Her son was home. Things needed to be set in motion. Adiz arrived with Emeka. Jae-won met them at the door, warm with Emeka in the way of two people who had shared something real, his hand briefly finding the small of Adiz's back as he guided her inside. It was a small gesture. Nobody in the entrance hall missed it. Jae-woo appeared at Adiz's side within minutes and began talking to her with the easy familiarity of someone who had decided they were already friends and was simply catching the other person up. Adiz was surprised and immediately charmed. Jae-woo had clearly been waiting for this. Then Jae-won introduced Adiz to a small cluster of associates near the center of the room. This is Adiz, he said. A brief pause. A friend of mine. She heard it. Every part of it. Her expression didn't move. She filed it quietly and stayed present in the conversation and gave nothing away. Across the room, Emeka caught her eye. She gave him one look that said, not now, not here, and he subsided. The gathering moved. Conversations shifted. Adiz excused herself from a group near the window and moved across the room. She was not looking where she was going, and neither was the woman turning quickly from the drinks table. Their shoulders connected. Adiz steadied herself. Looked up. Yoona Seo blinked once. Then recognition traveled across her face like a current, starting in her eyes and reaching her expression in the time it took to draw a breath. Watch where you're going. The voice was the same as the grocery store, precise, unbothered, carrying. Are you blind? The guests nearest to them went quiet. Adiz looked at her. One full second of recognition. The aisle. The basket. The woman who had stepped in front of her and told her that an apology wasn't enough. You. Not confusion, recognition. Small world, Adiz said. Her voice was entirely level. What are you doing here? Yoona's eyes moved to the room around them, the Han residents, the guests, the gathering, and then back to Adiz with an expression that was making rapid calculations. This isn't. She glanced around the room. You don't belong at an event like this. And yet, Adiz said simply. Yoona's composure bent. She stepped forward, and her hand came up, the intention in it unmistakable, directed at Adiz's face. Han Jae-won was already watching. Yoona's hand lifted slow, deliberate, meant to land. I wouldn't do that if I were you. He had not raised his voice. He never needed to. The room went completely still, the particular stillness that falls when the person who controls the temperature of a space has spoken and everyone present has registered it simultaneously. Yoona's hand dropped. She turned to look at him. He held her gaze with the full, cold authority of a man who had been running boardrooms since he was 24 and had never once needed volume to make a point. Emeka, who had moved without realizing it, stopped where he was. Adiz looked at Jae-won once, steady, unhurried, then excused herself and continued in the direction she had been going. She did not perform composure. She simply had it. Mrs. Han cleared her throat. The room remembered how to breathe. She gestured to Yoona, come, sit, and the gathering reassembled itself around the rupture with the practiced efficiency of people who understood that scenes were to be smoothed over and continued past. When Adiz returned, Mrs. Han was standing. She addressed the gathering with the ease of a woman who had been hosting important rooms for 30 years. She spoke warmly about the Seo family, about their history, about Yoona, accomplished, well-raised, from a family that had been close to Han's for many years. She turned to her son with the particular smile of a mother who believes she is doing something kind. I think it's time you two were properly introduced. Jae-won looked at his mother. Then he laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. It was simply the laugh of a man looking at a situation that had moved so far past the point of possibility that the only honest response was amusement. One quiet, genuine sound. Yuna's smile began its collapse before he said a single word. Mother. He stood. Whatever this arrangement is, I am not part of it. I'm sorry. He looked at Yuna directly. I mean no disrespect to your family. His voice was even and final and left no room for negotiation. Then he turned to the room. He extended his hand toward Adiz. Allow me to reintroduce someone. His eyes found her across the space. This is Adiz. My girlfriend. No hesitation. No room for interpretation. Jaiwa's hand flew to her mouth. A sound escaped, small, involuntary, entirely delighted. She looked at her mother. Pulled her hand down. Her expression did not fully recover. The room absorbed it. The associates exchanged glances. A few quiet realizations moved through the gathering like a current, the hand on her back at the door, the way he had moved across the room when Yuna raised her hand, all of it recontextualizing in real time. Yuna stood completely still. The stillness of someone whose entire architecture has just come down in public, quietly and completely, with nowhere to direct the damage. Mrs. Han said nothing. Her face said everything it needed to. Jaewon held his hand out to Adiz. I've seen enough tonight. She looked at him. Then she crossed the room and took his hand. They walked out together, unhurried, together, not performing anything. Just leaving. In the car, she turned to him. You introduced me as your friend. I know. Why? I wanted to see their reaction when I corrected it. He glanced at her sideways. They gave me exactly what I expected. She looked at him for a moment. Then she leaned across and kissed him, brief and certain. She pulled back. I love you. He looked at her. Something in his face that was usually kept very carefully behind everything else came fully forward. I love you. From the back seat, Emika's voice arrived with the feeling. I am right here. I exist. I am a person. Later that night, Adiz sat on the edge of her bed while Emika leaned in her doorway, and they debriefed the evening the way they had debriefed everything since they were children, honestly, completely, interrupting each other. The grocery store woman, Adiz said. What? She told him. The aisle. The shoulder. The blocking. The hand that had almost connected with her face tonight before Jaewon moved. Emika's expression traveled through several places before settling somewhere protective and retrospectively furious. And you didn't tell me. I handled it. Adiz. I handled it, Emika. He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved fast. Yes, she said. Like he'd been watching the whole time. Yes, she said again. And something in the way she said it closed the subject gently but completely. The following evening, Jaewon sat with his mother in the quiet of the main sitting room. The house was still. The gathering was long over. Between them on the low table were 2 cups of tea that had gone slightly cold. Mrs. Han told him what he had done, how it had looked, what it had cost, the Seo family's feelings, her careful arrangement, the evening she had built. She said it without accusation, which was somehow heavier than accusation. She was not a woman who needed to perform disappointment. She simply expressed it precisely and let it land. Jaewon listened to all of it. Then he said, I know what you were trying to do. I know you believed it was right. But I have made my decision, Mother. This is the woman I love. That is not changing. A long silence. Outside, something moved in the garden. The house settled around them. Then Mrs. Han said, the Seo girl's behavior tonight. A pause. I did not expect that. That is not who I understood her to be. She looked at her tea. I chose incorrectly. Another pause, longer. Bring your girlfriend. Properly. I want to see her as she is. He came to Adiz the next afternoon. Found Emika there too, who looked up from the sofa and said immediately, with great feeling, that Jaewon had completely forgotten he existed the moment he linked up with his sister, and that this was a betrayal he was still processing. Jaewon sat down beside him and laughed, a real one, full and easy, the kind that didn't happen in boardrooms. Adiz watched them from the kitchen doorway and felt something settle in her that was quiet and certain and did not need naming. The meeting with Mrs. Han happened 2 days later. Just the two of them, over tea in the formal sitting room. Mrs. Han studied her the way she studied everything completely, without performing the study, filing what she found. She asked real questions. About Adi's work, her family, the choices that had brought her to this point. Adiz answered everything directly and offered nothing she wasn't asked for. She did not try to be liked. She did not perform warmth she didn't feel. She was simply herself, the same in this room as she was everywhere, and Mrs. Han, who had spent decades watching people become different versions of themselves the moment they sat across from her, noticed. Near the end of the tea, Mrs. Han set down her cup. "I did not meet you well," she said. "The first time. I apologize for that." Adiz held her gaze. "Thank you. Take care of my son," Mrs. Han said. "He carries more than he shows." "I know," Adiz said. "I see it." Mrs. Han nodded once. Small. Final. The matter settled. The dinner that followed 2 weeks later was the real one, nothing ceremonial, nothing arranged, just family around a table. Mrs. Han at the head. Jaiwo beside Adiz and talking constantly without any apparent intention to stop. Emeka across from Jaewon, the two of them falling back into the ease of the barracks within minutes, Emeka already telling a story about their 3rd week of training that Jaewon was already shaking his head at before it was finished. Adiz sat in the middle of it and felt settled. Completely and without effort. Like something that had been finding its shape for 2 years had finally arrived at it. Midway through the meal, Jaewon set down his chopsticks. Reached into his jacket. Emeka saw it first. His sentence stopped mid-word. He went very still. Jaewon looked at Adiz. Said her name once. Just her name, the way he had said it on the phone the night before his discharge, like it was enough on its own. From a hospital corridor where you didn't ask who I was, to everything that came after. He held her gaze. I don't want a life that doesn't have you in it. He opened the box. Jaiwa grabbed Emeka's arm across the table. He did not shake her off. His hand came up and covered his mouth. Adiz looked at the ring. Looked at him. Looked around the table, Mrs. Han watching with something in her face that was unmistakably close to warmth, full and unguarded for the first time. Emeka with his eyes bright and his hand pressed to his mouth. Jaiwa making no attempt whatsoever to contain herself. She looked back at Jaewon. Yes! The table came alive. Jaiwoo's sound of joy was immediate and complete, and she stopped pretending to moderate it. Emeka stood up and then didn't know what to do with himself standing and sat back down. Mrs. Han set her glass down with deliberate care and smiled fully, finally, the whole of it, for the first time since any of this began. Jaewon slid the ring onto Adiz's finger. Then he looked at her, and she looked at him, and between them was everything that had built across hospital corridors and barracks visiting days, and late-night phone calls, and a grocery store aisle, and a homecoming party, and all the rest of it, all of it arriving here. At this table, in this room, chosen. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment you knew she was the one? Because I read every single one. Thank you for watching.